Welcome to the Altruistic Libertarian, advocate for a genuinely free society. I am Anthony Wheeler, and today we continue the metaphysical basis for a genuinely free society, Part 2. Science is the king of Western society, credited with creating the technology that dominates modern human existence. The systematic examination, contemplation, and experimentation that characterizes the scientific method has transformed human civilization in ways beyond reckoning. And yet, in all the history of science, basic human questions remain unanswered. Is there a purpose to life? If so, what is it? What is the ultimate meaning of humankind? Why are we here? What is most important to humans? Do universal human values exist? And if so, what are they? Scientists, stand helpless before such questions, as nothing of ultimate meaning has been discovered scientifically, and that's unlikely to change. That is because, by full intention, science is valueless. What is good or bad is scientifically irrelevant, right or wrong as well. Beauty, holiness, imagination, and kindness all exist beyond the realm of science. The range of human understanding is potentially quite limited. We perceive and conceptualize very little of what actually exists in the universe. We think we know everything that there is to know, or at the very least, we think we are capable of knowing everything there is to know. But this is unlikely to be the case. To understand how this might be so, consider the common guinea pig, and how such a creature perceives and conceptualizes the world. They see, smell, and hear the same things we do in a given instance, yet process the sense data in an entirely different, and in most cases, limited way. Given the limitations of guinea pigs, it would be unreasonable to expect one ever to comprehend Milton or understand the game of baseball. There's no reason to believe that humans have reached the limit of biological intelligence. It's possible, if not likely, that a greatly superior mind to humans, say one as advanced as a human's is over a guinea pig's, might come to exist. Such a mind might have the same relationship to humans that humans have to guinea pigs. It's impossible to know, although science fiction imagines, what such an intelligence might comprehend. Perhaps magnitudes more knowledge than humans ever will. I call this the guinea pig conundrum. While the detailed mechanisms of biological evolution remain murky, we can be rationally certain that evolution has occurred. Every living thing today descended from living things in the past, and many life forms in the past differ from those that exist today, indicating that changes have taken place. As far as we know, every life form that exists is related, in that they share the same genetic building blocks and the same left-handed amino acids. The other thing we know about the animals is that they behave in a species-specific manner, and that they possess instincts that are genetically determined. They are programmed from the time they are born, or hatched, to seek food, hide their feces, fight for territory, stay with the herd, dig in the ground, find a mate, or run away from danger. Humans are clearly part of evolutionary history, and only differ by a small percentage of genes from their closest relative, chimpanzees. But it has only been in recent decades that human behavior has been subject to scientific study from an evolutionary perspective. Edward O. Wilson is one of the scientific pioneers in sociobiology, the study of social animal behavior. Wilson helped bridge the gap between science and philosophy, as the evolutionary context of the human condition is essential in understanding both the limits and the opportunities for humans now and in the future. He goes on to touch on one of those limitations when he writes, I quote, "The essence of the argument, then, is that the brain exists because it promotes the survival and multiplication of the genes that direct its assembly. The human mind is a device for survival and reproduction, and reason is just one of its various techniques. Steven Weinberg has pointed out that physical reality remains so mysterious that even to physicists, because of the extreme improbability that it was constructed to be understood by the human mind. We can reverse that insight to note, with still greater force, that the intellect was not constructed to understand atoms or even to understand itself, but to promote the survival of human genes." Unquote. It's impossible to escape Wilson's conclusion. Everything we know about nature supports the fact that humans are evolved creatures that possess a specific nature, one subject to scientific inquiry. Nowhere in human nature will purpose beyond survival and reproduction be found. The nature of language and the centrality of language to human understanding is critically important to our epistemology. Everything experienced over and above basic human urges, everything deeply felt, thought, imagined, or expressed relies on the use of language. Every cultural advance, historical understanding, philosophical speculation, spiritual belief, artistic achievement, or scientific advance gets passed from one generation to the next via language. Anything newly discovered or originally imagined gets disseminated via language. The media doesn't matter. Books, internet, TV shows, town meetings all utilize language to transfer meaning and understanding from one group to another. Habermas asserts in the theory of communicative action that, quote, "Whatever language system we choose, we always start intuitively from the presupposition that truth is a universal validity claim." Unquote. This assumption of universally valid truth is highly problematic. Consider George Steiner's view. Quote, "Language is the main instrument of man's refusal to accept the world as it is. Without that refusal, without the unceasing generation by the mind of counterworlds, a generation which cannot be divorced from the grammar of counterfactual and operative forms, we would turn forever on the treadmill of the present. Reality would be all that is the case and nothing more. Ours is the ability, the need to gainsay or unsay the world, to image and speak it otherwise. In that capacity and its biological and social evolution may lie some of the clues to the question of the origins of human speech and the multiplicity of tongues. It is not perhaps a theory of information that will serve us best in trying to clarify the nature of language, but a theory of misinformation." Unquote. In order to survive, individual humans embedded deep within their cultural jungles and surrounded by the fronds of commercial and social engagements necessarily avoid all sense of actuality and instead embrace the fictions they create. Again, from Steiner, quote, "At the central level, the enemy is not the other drinker at the waterhole, the torturer seeking your name, the negotiator across the table, or the social bore. Language is centrally fictive because the enemy is actuality, because unlike the hominum, man is not prepared to abide that the thing which is." Unquote. Humans minimize the significance of actuality, ignore the implications of mathematical physics and organic chemistry, in the same manner that religion averts the eyes of the faithful from the prosaic and points instead to an afterworld, one both above and below them. So humans write stories, both on paper and with their individual lives. This is how John Richardson put it, quote, "Nietzsche's main thrust is that it's errors, as well as lies, that have been thus functional. Our cognitive practices are crucially built out of dispositions designed to get things wrong, i.e. out of drives to simplify and otherwise distort reality. Nietzsche interprets Kant's categories as precisely such requisite mistakes. We are all instinctively structure our experiences into substances and causes because these fictions helped our ancestors to cope quickly and roughly with their surroundings." Unquote. So while this created fictional life perpetuates itself in a semblance of harmony and meaning for some people, for others it reveals the instability of lost certainties. Vatimo writes, "Today, when we all know that television lies, and that the media do not in the least supply disinterested and objective representations of the world, and when even what we call nature is only accessible to us through scientific paradigms fraught with historicity and loaded with theory, hence with prejudice, lacking which, for that matter, we would be unable to know anything, we can no longer tranquilize ourselves by pretending to stand with our feet on the ground observing things as they are and dismissing the rest as nonsense. The end of ideology is also the triumph of ideologies, of the multiple interpretations of the world seen for what they are, that make individual choice and decision ineluctable." Unquote. And when it becomes apparent that all this bourgeois and idealistic effort proves ultimately unrewarding, we become disillusioned, angry, rebellious, full of nausea and fear and trembling. Writes Steiner, quote, "We secrete from within ourselves the grammar, the mythologies of hope, of fantasy, of self-deception without which we would have been arrested at some rung of primitive behavior or would long since have destroyed ourselves. It is our syntax, not the physiology of the body or the thermodynamics of the planetary system, which is full of tomorrows. Indeed, this may be the only area of free will, of assertion outside direct neurochemical causation or programming. We speak, we dream ourselves free of the organic trap." Unquote. Thus language, and all that flows from it, art, science, history, culture, stand at the center of the human universe, an inescapable palace of meaning and significance that rules over every state of consciousness, social interaction, and remembered experience. Truth can be defined as that which is true or in accordance with fact or reality. Yet we have already established how nebulous language can be when relating simple facts, or how distant reality resides from the actual universe. This leads to the conclusion that the value, rightness, and meaning of every true statement depends on a particular perspective within a specific context, without exception. No true statement stands alone, apart from the surround, independent of a mind. In other words, absolute universal truth doesn't exist. Ayn Rand believed otherwise. She cited Aristotle's principle of non-contradiction as proof that universal truth exists and that A is A clear example of it. Yet consider the following. If A is intended to mean something like any particular thing is itself, then we are considering a meaningless tautology, no different than saying something like that goat is that goat. If the statement A is A, it is clear that the first A is not the second A, as they both reside in a distinct and differing spatial relationship to one another. This pertains to any rendering of the statement in a text or on a chalkboard, say. The A's will always differ in some manner. If we consider the A in A is A symbolic, then we can disprove the statement by speculating that the first A is the first letter of the alphabet, whereas the second A is an article, A as in a cat ate a mouse. One a letter, the other a word. If we think of A as the first letter of the alphabet, then we might interpret the statement A is A by changing it to A is alpha. In other words, the meaning of A can change based on interpretation or context. Another professed statement of universal truth is the equation 2 plus 2 equals 4. But in fact, in base 3, 2 plus 2 equals 11. Any mathematical statement requires system context, and is only relevant or meaningful within that context. Every statement, thought, vision, or image that purports to represent truth requires full context and a specific perspective to be valid and or useful to humans. To unwrap the truth requires a person to reproduce the context in which it was given and recreate the perspective from which it originated. No truth statement stands alone and retains its meaning. Because a universal perspective does not exist this side of God, neither does universal truth. We leave the last word on truth to UNESCO. Quote, "Of course, not everything is unsayable in words, only the living truth." Unquote. That concludes our show for today. In the next episode, we continue with part 3 of the philosophical basis for a genuinely free society. Until then, peace.